Thank you. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Welcome to How Maine Became the National Electrification Leader. This is the second in our new series at the Building Decarbonization Coalition, looking at specific states and what it is they're doing around building decarbonization. And today I have the great privilege of learning about Maine along with all of you. And welcome to our panel presentation. We have three great panelists for you that are going to actually present the expertise of today's presentation. And we'll get started with some basic information in just a moment here. Before we go to all the exciting things happening in Maine, let me just tell you where you are, where you've landed, in case you're new to the Building Decarbonization Coalition. First of all, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Amy Ryder. I'm the Director of Policy Acceleration here at the Building Decarbonization Coalition. And we are a membership-based coalition working to bring people together, policymakers, stakeholders, environmental groups, and the people in order to decarbonize the built environment. For today, we do have some webinar logistics. Everyone will be muted. In terms of our participants, please feel free to just track any questions that you have in the moment in the chat. We'll be capturing those and answering them at the end of the presentations. This webinar will be recorded, and like all of our resources are available in our resource library on our website, buildingdecarb.org, and you can find it there after today's presentation, as well as our previous version in this series and others. The last one we did was on Illinois. So if you're curious and want to go back and check out other states or other activities, there's lots of resources there. We do have a newsletter that you're welcome to sign up for in that location. And of course, more information about becoming a member. Today, we're going to walk through some basic context around Maine for those of you not familiar. We'll do introductions of our panelists, and then we'll jump right into our panel presentations. As I mentioned, have three great panelists who I'll introduce in a moment, and then leave time at the end for some questions and answers from our audience. So just to get started, I had actually quite a bit of fun putting this together as someone who's less familiar than Maine, and I suspect many of you are as well. But it was interesting just to learn a little bit about it. And it's one of the less populated states in the nation and one of the least dense. So 1.5 million people, not quite, in their spaciousness there, which is lovely. And then 500,000 existing housing units. What's really fun about this, though, is how many of them are going electric, and we'll get more specifics around that now. These statistics are from 2020, so you can take a look to see not that many houses are yet all electric, but 75% of them already use electricity for heating. For cooking, but the heating piece, because of Maine's climate, and we'll get into more specifics, is often fueled by wood fuel, which is less common in other parts of the country. So there's also just not a lot of construction there. So fewer than 5,500 new housing units built per year. And where do they get their electricity and other fuel sources? A lot of different places. It is a partially deregulated energy market in Maine, although that varies depending where you are and what kind of building you're running. And I found 6 primary electricity suppliers, but a lot of them that have the potential to supply electricity, and 21 retail and natural gas suppliers. So it does definitely depend, like many places in the country, on where you live, what your options are. But that deregulated market where you're getting transmission distribution separate from the supply is pretty universal for the residential marketplace. So just some context for our Northeastern friends, what's happening in Maine. I'll turn it over to the experts. We have here today Dan Burgess from the State of Maine, and he'll introduce himself, as will all of our presenters. Dana Fischer from Mitsubishi Electric, and Scott Libby from Royal River Heat Pumps, to each of them bringing different perspectives. Dan will be sharing with us a little bit of what's happening with the energy programs and their rebate structure, as well Dana from both the manufacturer's perspective more specific of how those programs are working, and then the perspective of the heat pump installer, what consumers are looking for, and how those rebate programs are working. So thank you all for being here. Really looking forward to your presentations, and we'll go ahead and start it off with Dan.
Hey everyone, great to be with you. I'm again Dan Burgess. I'm director of the Governor's Energy Office here in the great state of Maine. The Governor's Energy Office is the state designated energy office, and I work closely with a number of different parties across the state. Let's talk about Efficiency Maine Trust, which is our third-party energy efficiency administrator. And I'm also on the board of NASIO and other organizations, and I'm really pleased and excited to be here with such a great panel to talk about all the great things happening in Maine. So Amy, thanks for the invite and the overview. Next slide. I do want to say, thinking about Maine, so we are a large rural state with about 1.3 million people. We'll talk about where our energy comes from in a few minutes. We have two primary large utilities that are investor owned, and then a handful, as you can see on that map, that are consumer or municipal owned utilities. So the current governor of Maine is Governor Janet Mills, and she came into office in 2019, and she's really and is beginning serving her second term, the first year, or just back into office this year. And when she came into office, she really prioritized combating climate change and advancing clean energy, and that has happened in a few different ways, which could be a webinar all in of itself. But I did want to give you the context of what's happening here as we talk about today's topic. So the governor signed into law emission reduction requirements of 45% below 1990 by 2030, 80% by 2050, set a goal, a target for achieving carbon neutrality as a state by 2045, and then created something called the Maine Climate Council, which is tasked with delivering a plan targeted at how we're going to meet those ambitious objectives. Not on here, and I'll talk a little bit more, as we also have an 80% renewable portfolio standard by 2030. And so we are well on our way to meeting that 2030 RPS target. And the governor's actually recently directed our office to get us to 100% clean energy by 2040. So we're busy working on what that could look like. Next slide, please. So if you look at where Maine's emissions come from, the majority, 49%, come from the transportation sector. 33% come from the built environment, both the residential and commercial sector. 12% industrial, and 5% electric power. This is, we are, again, a large rural state. We are dependent on transportation to move people, move goods, move our economy. And so I think that number's a little bit higher in Maine than it is across the country from an emissions portfolio. But we're going to spend most of the time here talking about the built environment, which is the second most. And I think where a lot of the exciting progress has been made. I'll note everything I'm going to talk about here is available online at mainewon'twait.org or maine.gov/energy. We do a lot of kind of tracking, and all of that information is available online. Next slide. So where does our home heating come from? So we have a little bit of different numbers than what Amy put out. This comes from EIA. There are a few different sources, but generally, on the top left, if you look at home heating, 58% of Maine consumers are relying on fuel oil for their home heating needs. Should note that fuel oil also encompasses kerosene, which we talk about a little bit more later, but 58% fuel oil, 13% propane. So that's a significant amount of Maine using delivered fuels or fuels delivered directly to the home to heat their home. We have 10% electricity, a large portion of that's baseboard, but growing in the heat pump space, 8% natural gas, and then the 10% other, which would include some of that wood heat. I'll just say it's not uncommon for Maine homes to have a few different systems, whether it's a primary system, wood heat for the winter, and then even more these days, heat pumps, which we're going to talk about some more. But if you compare that 58% number, some of these other numbers of where we're getting our home heating fuel from, we are a national outlier when it comes to that reliance on fuel oil. The bottom chart shows every state fuel oil consumed by residential sector and percentage. So Maine we are that yellow bar all the way on the bottom to the right. The other blue bars, and that's reliance on home heating. The other blue bars are the New England states. So you can see this is a main challenge, but it also reflects kind of what's happening in New England. I think, large disparate population and not a significant amount of natural gas infrastructure. So it makes sense that we would be dependent on delivered fuels. But that's in comparison to just 4% nationally when you look at the other states. Next slide. I did want to, this is no surprise to folks on this call, but important to note, this chart is Maine delivered fuel prices by week and what we've experienced, particularly over the last year to 2 years, coming on the heels of the pandemic, but then also the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have seen unprecedented spikes in price per gallon of these delivered fuels. You can see, particularly for heating oil and kerosene, off to the right of that chart, we've just seen really significant increases, which have had a really significant impact on Maine people. Propane, from a delivered fuel perspective, has stayed relatively less volatile, but wanted you to know that that reliance, and particularly we're feeling the volatility and high prices this past winter, and so it makes things like electrification that much more compelling for Maine people. Next slide. So we're going to electrify. We need to make sure that we've got a clean, renewable, a clean grid to power that. And so the chart on the right, on the left, shows where our electricity comes from. We share a grid with the other New England states. And this is from ISO New England, our RTO, which manages our grid. And what you can see, I just want to point out two trends on the left, is that we've seen from the year 2000 to 2020, we have those bottom gray bars represent coal and oil. And so we've gone from, 35%-ish coal and oil to less than 0.1%. We are utilizing oil during some peaking periods in the winter. But what you can see is that the top bar is an increased reliance on natural gas. So that light blue shows that we've gone from 13% to 40% as we've reduced. And so as you think about electrification, you can clearly see on this chart, we've got nuclear, we've got renewables, we've got hydro, which are going to play important roles. The chart on the right shows what all the states in New England have been adopting renewable portfolio standards to make sure that as these aging fleets retire, as we think about electrification, that we all have renewable portfolio standards, which help us increase the number of renewables on the grid. Next slide. So we have made significant progress when it comes to our energy efficiency policy here in Maine. We went from being 16th, 15th, 17th in the ACEE rankings to being most improved and ranked number 5 in the country last year, which we're quite proud of. We don't have Efficiency Maine Trust on this Zoom, on this webinar, but everything I'm going to be talking about, and I think you'll hear more about later, has to do with the really impressive programs that they're running. And I'm proud to sit on the board of that organization, and they're a big part of the progress being made here. Next slide. So the Climate Council, as we saw where the emissions come from, and working with the governor and the legislature, have set targets for us to achieve in order to achieve our GHG reduction requirements. So in Maine, we are seeking to double the pace of weatherization and having a significant increase in the low-income residential units. We've weatherized over 9,000 dwellings since 2019, and that's with Efficiency Maine Trust, but also our Maine State Housing, which runs the WAP program. You can see that there was a dip post-pandemic or coming into the pandemic, but new incentives that the governor put forward from the federal ARPA funds to incoming bipartisan infrastructure funding that'll be coming to the state, you can see that curve beginning to go back up. We have an older housing stock when compared to other parts of the country, and so this is just really something we want to see continuing to move forward. Next slide. On heat pumps, one of the reasons we're here to talk about today, when the governor came into office, she set a goal in 2019 of installing 100,000 new heat pumps by 2025, with at least 15,000 of those being in income-eligible households. We've been tracking this with Efficiency Maine Trust in Maine Housing, which does do some heat pump installations through the HEAP program. But as we look year over year, we've gone from more than doubling the amount of heat pumps that are available in Maine, and are seeing cost and emissions reductions because of that. Next slide. And then I think, something that doesn't necessarily get talked about a lot in some circles, but maybe in this one, given the focus of this group's work. So Maine has seen incredible uptake in heat pump hot water heaters as well. More than 30,000 installed since 2019. And then we're also moving forward with getting to 2021, updating our building codes. And so you can kind of see this progress, feel this progress. And Dana and Scott are going to talk about kind of their view, their lens. I think what I would say is, as we think about Maine being a colder than average state, we had periods this winter, certain cold snaps where we were well below zero. And I think Dana and Scott can talk to it a little bit more, but really saw really strong performance with the heat pumps that were installed, seeing continued uptick in demand, a call for additional programs and incentives. And so we're excited about the work of this organization, excited about the federal funding coming. And I'm going to turn it over to Dana, who spent some time at Efficiency Maine Trust and now is with Mitsubishi. So has a really great perspective of how we get to where we are and where we're going.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. That was awesome. So I'm Dana Fischer. I am with Mitsubishi Electric. I'm currently in the role of Director of Regulatory Strategy. So I'm kind of flung far and wide all across the country on a number of different issues. But I'm really grateful to the opportunity. Thank you, Amy, and everybody from BDC to be a part of this call and share what with renewed sort of national perspective is the best practices that are being performed and being kept going in Maine. I had the great fortune of being at Efficiency Maine for about 7 years and working with a number of extremely talented and dedicated professionals at the trust, including Andy Meyer, who I see is on the call. Commuted with him for a number of years up to Augusta, but also the tireless work of the executive director, Michael Stoddard, and a whole host of others. But I think one of the things that I want to just point out right away is that Efficiency Maine Trust as an entity, the name Efficiency Maine has been around for a very long time, but they were turned into a quasi-state agency in 2010. There's only a handful of similar organizations around the country, including Efficiency Vermont. Yes, thank you for jumping to that. And Energy Trust of Oregon and a few others. But really, it's kind of an important thing to mention simply because they're not beholden to the bottom line for the sales of electricity or natural gas. And so the dollars that are received for conservation or reduction of carbon get invested specifically for those purposes. It's a very dedicated group and specific to that. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that when policymakers are setting up programs, that they look carefully at the underlying motivations of the entities that are charged with undertaking those, because it really makes a big difference in what your outcomes are. So much like Amy and Dan, I have my own little slice of Maine. Of course, everybody sort of visualizes where we are and the fact that it's cold. Here it is, in the middle of May, where we're coming up to the end of April, I should say, and May is my favorite month. But it's beautiful year round. We're really not supposed to talk about it because we don't want too many people showing up all at once. But we're also becoming well known for heat pumps, and I've been using heat pumps to heat my home for a number of years now. I think it's 8 years now, and Andy Meyer, who's on the call, has been heating his house with them for a little bit longer than that. But I haven't used any backup in years, and even this past February, when it got to be very, very cold, it really wasn't a problem. Next slide, please. And we got a lot of feedback from consumers and posts on social media regarding this. As I travel the country and talk to different contractors about the uptake of cold climate or all climate heat pumps, A lot of people are skeptical that they can operate at super cold temperatures and are concerned that they would be cold. And I just want to reassure everybody that the opposite. You're likely to have, in some cases, we've seen less service problems associated with heat pumps than with conventional fuel systems. During this extremely cold period during this past February, when parts of Maine got down below -20, the experience of people with heat pumps was just another day. But meanwhile, some of the folks who sell and provide service to gas and oil units were recommending that that all of the contractors be on high alert for low gas pressure in grid systems or with gelling of oil in tanks. So just keep in mind that we have a lot of experience in these extremely cold circumstances, and people remain quite comfortable, and very little experience with, none. Like here's Josh Oxley down in Belfast, 1,500 units in the field that he's installed just in the past 4 years, and he got 0 service calls during that extremely cold event. Next slide, please. This is a couple of snapshots from, and you'll have to forgive me, a lot of these different pieces I stole directly from the Efficiency Maine website, which they really deserve credit for making these things happen. And there's a lot of work. It's not a set it and forget it. You have to do a lot of tweaking along the way in order to make a good program better. And they do that with vigor. And so you can see the results, they track them, they share this with the contractor so everybody can see what's going on. And the uptake of heat pumps per capita is just off the charts relative to just about every other program in the country. The only other state that I know of that is sort of at the same level per capita is Vermont. And there are other pockets. New Hampshire is doing very well, and the Pacific Northwest has a number of states that are also very, very active in these things. And there's a lot of states, including Massachusetts and New York, that are taking great strides to try and increase their uptake of heat pumps and working very closely on those things. But it takes time. It takes time, and it takes effort and proper design as well. And Dan was proper in making a great shout out about heat pump water heaters. Of all the states in the country, Maine receives more heat pumps than any other state except for California. And of course, California has like 30 times the population. So it's really a stunning testament to the work that's done, and really not overly complicated in how they accomplish it. Andy has been doing this trick for a long time, basically buying down the cost of heat pump water heaters at the point of sale to where they're the lowest cost option. Not by a lot, but just enough so that when consumers and contractors are making the decision on what to replace on burnout, that the lowest cost option is also the best, most efficient option for them. And that has really, really generated fantastic success. Next slide. So I've got a handful of keys to the castle, because I knew that there would be a bunch of policy folks or consultants or advocates on this call. And so I really wanted to point out what were the things that were really driving, at least from my perspective, a lot of the uptake that over the years. And, a lot of times there's such a focus on just incentives. How much cash are you giving people? Who's eligible for it? But there's actually a lot of other pieces that are at least as important as the incentive level. In increasing the uptake of heat pumps, or even weatherization measures or electrification, any of this stuff that are part of the psychology of driving the marketplace. And so, number one, Efficiency Maine has a fantastic locator tool for registered vendors. So contractors have to sign up with them, and in this locator tool, a consumer can go on, they can specify the service that they're looking for. They can dial in their zip code and a radius that they want to have vendors show up on. And they can also select how they want it sorted. So they could sort by alphabetical, by their name, or by, but the primary and default sort feature is by the number of rebates. And that's the number of rebates completed in the past 4 months. And I recall, and I believe it's still the same, but I mean, like at the time, we played around with a couple of different time periods and found that if you made it much longer, 6 months or a year, you could have people who had big projects and that were sort of stagnant in the marketplace. And if you made it too short, it was too chaotic for it to be meaningful for the selection for homeowners. Ideally, what you're trying to do when you employ this kind of a filter is to make it so that when a consumer makes a phone call, they're able to get somebody in the very first call on the top of the list who's going to call them back. Because you get a lot of consumer fatigue if they have to make a couple of phone calls to get somebody who's going to be able to schedule them. So like that's a twisted little thing in there, is that consumers have fatigue for reaching out for people. And so designing a tool that's going to it just does two things. It provides like an instant way for people to make sure that they're going to reach out to somebody who's active and working and looking to follow up on leads, but you're also driving the psychology among the contractors that they want to be listed so that they get these free leads from the program. And so they're more inclined to participate and seek to engage in projects that are going to keep them high up on the list. So it's a double whammy by having it structured this way. And I know that there are lots of locator tools. Most of them are just lists of who works that area or something like that. But this puts some game theory in there that both helps consumers and contractors. So again, it seems really simple, but it's there. And next slide, please. So then the vendor network, the folks that show up on that locator tool, it's also you're providing some insurance. So in order to get listed on the locator tool, the contractor has to sign up with Efficiency Maine. They have to demonstrate that they have the basic capabilities, insurance coverage, licenses in order to comply. And they also have to sign a code of conduct. And really the code of conduct and a lot of the different aspects of the programs are driven around the idea that, we want best outcomes. We're not going to, nanny people to death, but this is what we want them to agree to in order to participate. And it's the sort of things that are like, how you'd want them to treat, your family if they were coming to your house and taking care of your business. And it really just sort of sets the tone in the marketplace for participation. Now, the program isn't going out there and trying to figure out how they can kick people off. Contrary to that, these are actually all things that help people have successful businesses and increase the satisfaction of consumers. So they're more likely to talk about it with their friends and say, hey, you know what? They were awesome. They cleaned up the whole place before they left. Couldn't even tell that they were there. And they explained everything really well. And they didn't make a ton of noise or smoke on site or all these different things. Like those build success. And so that's you can enhance the experience of consumers in the marketplace by just forming expectations. Next slide, please. So also simplicity. This is a snapshot of the claim form, and it's very small text, and all these things you can find on the efficiencymaine.com website. But I want you to understand that this is a one-page PDF. This is all that's required to fill out. It's a lot of work to make sure that the wording is there and you're really condensing the fields that are required to the bare minimum. It's very common for programs to say, oh, well, we're going to evaluate this program for cost effectiveness. We need to know every last value and figure and fill out and triplicate or whatever else. And so there are some complicated programs where people will have multiple people hired in order to, contractors will hire multiple office staff in order to just manage the rebate process. And it's just incredibly onerous. But if you have a single PDF that people can write out in pencil or type out and email and take a photograph and email it into the rebate processing, it makes it very quick. And it also provides you with a paper trail. A lot of programs that say, oh, well, we're going to be really advanced and we're going to do everything online and have online features. It's costly, it's expensive, you run into bugs, and I'm not sure that you get any better results. So just keep that in mind. Simple is not bad. It's actually quite advantageous, particularly where you're looking for the elegance of simplicity. Next slide, please. For heat pump installations, and I think there are some checklists from some other technologies as well, along the lines of setting expectations, there's a checklist form that has to be submitted with the rebate form. So this is a second PDF that needs to be done, but it really is, these are the rules. This is what needs to be done. And it's very concise and really focuses on the key best practices as reminders and in the sequence of installation. It's not 27 8x10 glossy photos with double print on the back and we got to make sure that they take a photo of every piece of insulation to do this, that. No, you tell the contractors, look, we're going to inspect, we're going to offer to inspect every single home. We're going to call them up to find out if they're happy, and if they want us to come out or do a virtual FaceTime tour of their installation to see if everything looks good, we're going to offer that to them. All you have to do is tell the contractors that you're going to check up on their work and provide that as an option, and that these are the clear expectations. We're not gonna ding you. If we see something that we would recommend some alterations on for the future, we're gonna convey those to you as a learning moment. If there's something that's really legitimately problematic, we'll talk to you and alert you to that. But it really is an opportunity to just constantly improve, because there's always going to be new people entering the marketplace, and there's always an opportunity to bring new skills and new people in. So it's a partnership between a successful program and the contractors that are engaged. Next slide, please. And then product criteria, having a very light criteria. In Maine, this has been maintained. I give Andy a lot of credit for being able to maintain this, but there is one number for heat pumps that determines whether they qualify for or not. And that really is tied explicitly to the cost effectiveness of that equipment versus a baseline piece of equipment. Now, Efficiency Maine also gets cooling credit, a carbon credit, all these other things, but they don't have to have metrics for all of those. They just look at what the resulting cooling SEER value is relative to what the baseline would have been without the program. And so they were able to include that in their technical resource manual and calculate that. By having one number, it makes it incredibly easy for contractors and consumers to identify products that qualify for the incentives or not. Having extensive QPLs, qualified product lists, that are based on, whatever values the state decides to cook up, makes it very complicated for people to participate. Next slide, please. I'm going to move very quickly through some of these, but this is a critically important one, and this relates to IRA incentives. Fast payment, it's got to be fast. So at Efficiency Maine, and I know you'll be able to look at this slide deck later or take a screenshot, but it's, if you turn in your rebate form, your PDF, on a Monday morning before 8 a.m., so you can turn it at any point, but if the deadline is and I think this is still the case, 8 a.m. on Monday morning, 98% of those projects will be processed in the course of that week and set up for the check run on the following week. Every week, check runs are made, and that could be physical checks, but it's also ACHs directly to the contractor. So the consumer can sign over the payment to the contractor with a discount shown on their invoice. So the invoice gets included with the 2 pieces of claim form and sent in on that Monday morning. They're going to get an ACH directly to their account 10 days later. I mean, that's the kind of thing. Cash flow is incredibly important for businesses to grow, to make payroll, to pay their suppliers, to buy new trucks and vans. So fast payment is incredibly important. Next slide. Fair financing, since the early days, 2010, 2011, under the ARA era, there was funds available to set up a revolving loan fund. That is, probably undertaken by only, somewhere 8 or 10% of participants in the program, but historically, but it's incredibly important to have that available to consumers that can't afford the upfront costs all at once. It doesn't have to be free financing, which is extremely expensive, but it needs to be fair. And when it is fair, consumers they consider it good debt, and the default rates that Maine has seen from that have been exceptionally low. Next slide. This is my last slide here. This is sort of a suggestion on what I see as an opportunity for low-income households, perhaps through the IRA and a variety of different states, for a great way, cost-effective way. One of the limitations, and I'm going to jump over to Scott in just a second here, but one of the limitations in the IRA, HEHAR funding, or this is in homes too, is a maximum of 20% of all funded grant dollars being, that's sort of the maximum to be used for administrative costs. And, you know, for people who have seen a lot of programs running around the country, that's not a lot of money, particularly if you have to screen people's incomes and verify that. And so I have been advocating and suggesting looking at the model that Efficiency Maine has used from time to time in tackling low-income populations and getting heat pumps installed, which is to basically set a flat price based on what's available in the marketplace with a little bit of margin. Everybody's got a profit on the way to the marketplace, but pick a lower value than the flat $8,000 and identify a bunch of homeowners that qualify as known through other rebate or income level programs, and then provide, you know, a listing of installations to qualified contractors to go out and do those installations based on the specifications and the equipment that you have for just a one-to-one system to do maximum displacement possible from their living room, and then, you know, pay them off. And so it reduces the administrative costs of screening, of marketing, and for payout, and you're taking advantage of the marketplace and the benefits of having trained contractors. So it gives you a lot of control, and it's going to provide programs the means to help the maximum number of people. So I really, in my closing note, I just want to absolutely suggest that anybody that's interested in learning more about these programs to go to the Efficiency Maine website. All the keys to the castle are there. And you can download the materials, you can look at their reports, and you can replicate these things. And I know that they will shamelessly share every last aspect of them in the interest of broader energy efficiency everywhere, because that's what they wake up to do every single day. So thanks so much for the opportunity, and I'll turn it over to Scott to share some of his experience from the programs.
Okay, thank you very much, Dana and Dan. Those were great slides and presentations, and I have one slide which Amy put together for me. It's just a few pictures from my website. I am a contractor in Maine, Royal River Heat Pumps. We're in Freeport, just a mile south of LL Bean, which I'm sure everybody's heard of. I started in HVAC right here in Greater Portland in 1985. A couple more notes about Maine. It's the only state that only borders one other state. So all of these numbers that you hear from Dan and Dana are about the number of heat pumps coming into Maine. They are coming to Maine. They're not coming through and traveling to another state, because this is the end of the line. This is the northern end of Route 1 and Interstate 95. So when I graduated from high school, I went and bought myself a brand new leather tool belt, tape measure, brand new gloves, work boots, and showed up on a job site. You know, I can just picture myself now as an 18-year-old walking onto a job site to get my start in construction, and started in HVAC doing duct work on a big commercial project in Portland. I continued doing that, and over the course of 10 years, I was running multiple crews and, you know, multiple job sites by the time I was 25. After about 10 years of doing that, I decided to go get an associate's degree in heating and air conditioning. Spent about 3 years doing service, 3 years working for a couple manufacturing businesses, National Semiconductor and a big veterinary laboratory, so working on their HVAC systems. 5 years as a sales and service manager. You know, so I spent 25 years of my career saying heat pumps don't belong in Maine, because that was referring to the old technology that really stopped producing heat somewhere around 40 degrees, definitely at 32. So we're on the coast of Maine, so our design temperature is 3 degrees here in Freeport, so that's 3 degrees Fahrenheit. is the number that we're using to design heating systems. We are somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 heating degree days per year. So we're pretty cold. You know, on the coast, we have the benefit of the Atlantic Ocean. So as the wind is blowing across the ocean, it's actually warming it up a bit. So when you get a little deeper into the Maine, those numbers drop. So it's much colder. So it's always enjoyable for me to speak to a contractor in Connecticut or New York City or, you know, someplace down south saying that they can't do heat pumps there because it's cold. It's too cold. You know, here in Maine, I was working for a company as sales manager and service manager. I was selling a lot of heat pumps, and the owners came to me and told me I needed to stop selling heat pumps. This was about 11 or 12 years ago, to stop selling heat pumps. And when questioned why, they told me we have 20 guys who do ductwork and boilers and furnaces, and we need to keep them busy. So my suggestion was to retrain those people to install heat pumps. And after a long debate, and maybe you could even say an argument, I looked out the window in frustration and realized that my name was not on the sign out front, but the other three people in the room shared the same last name, which was on the sign out front. So I left and started Royal River Heat Pumps 10 years ago. I wanted to create a business where I would want to work. So, you know, we have really great paying jobs. You know, I pay 100% medical, dental, vision, long-term, short-term disability, and life insurance. We work a 4-day work week with an alternating 4-day weekend. So every other week, everyone in the company gets a 4-day weekend. So we're creating jobs that in the past have been stereotyped as, oh, you work in the trades. Well, you know, we have great jobs. We have a number of installers with bachelor degrees. You know, they're all making living wages. We shut down for 11 days at Christmas. So imagine a heating company in Maine shutting down for 11 days at Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's. It's the least productive week in a contractor's calendar. If I were to pass a vacation schedule around to everyone in the company at the beginning of the year, everyone would sign up for that week. Most people don't want us in their homes that week because they're visiting family or perhaps have family coming to visit them. So, you know, I have the employees don't want to be there. The customers don't want us there. So we just shut down. And, you know, the first year we did it, which was 10 years ago, you know, it was just me. I was head cook, bottle washer. I was doing the installs, the sales calls, the sweeping of the shop on the weekends. And there was a little less risk because if we had calls that came in, my cell number was actually the business phone. So I could jump in my truck and go fix whatever was broken. After a couple of years like that, I realized that I wasn't getting called. So now, even with 56 of us, there are 40 men and women who get in the vans every day and either go install or, for the most part, perform preventative maintenance on heat pumps. There's very little service, very little repairs. We have one person that takes that call on that 1 week shutdown. The last 3 years, we had 2 calls each week. And only once, the winter before last, did we have to go to a home to see what was happening with the heat pump. So as an HVAC company in Maine that does nothing but cold climate heat pumps, we're able to shut down for 11 days in heating season during the winter. You know, it's remarkable. I've never been able to do that with any other product. You know, I'm an HVAC guy, so 25 years ago, I bought an 1850s farmhouse. First thing I did was ripped out the oil-fired boiler that also made our hot water in the summertime or year-round, but you'd hear the oil burner kick on all summer long. So we would burn through about 100 gallons of oil in the course of a summer just making hot water. So I ripped that out, fabricated my own ductwork, did a propane furnace, and actually hooked a heat pump to it. So that was a dual fuel system that I was able to use the heat pump for probably about 30% of my heating. That was about 22 years ago. And then I've been on this cycle of every 5 years, ripping out my entire heating system, which I used to do in the slow season, which for us was beginning of December. So my wife always had the pleasure of watching the calendar flip to December 1st, and Scott would rip out the heating system. I replaced that one with geothermal. So my home has been all electric for 15 or 16 years now. 5 years later, I ripped out the geothermal and replaced that with Mitsubishi heat pumps, some single zones, and then when the low ambient multi-zone came out, I added some of that, and now it's in the process of being switched back to single zones. So it's pretty fun to live in an 1850s farmhouse that is all electric. Some weatherization has been done, and I saw a chat question pop up asking about how much are we pushing weatherization. I recommend to everyone that we insulate and weatherize our homes, but it's not sexy. So people want immediate gratification. So oftentimes they're doing heat pumps, and as long as we're not going to oversize it, we can actually put a heat pump in and get a lot of the results that both Dan and Dana showed on savings, and have them save money for weatherization. So we are scheduling, so of the 56 employees that I have, 4 of them are full-time sales. If somebody calls today and wants one of those salespeople to come to their home to design a system, we are scheduling them for the 3rd week in June. So we're about 2 months to even go look at a home. If somebody comes in today with their signed contract, we have about 4 spots left before the 4th of July. So we're, again, a little over 2 months out backlog. So, we only do heat pumps. So the awareness in Maine, the desire to have one in Maine, it's all there. And, there are 49 other states where heat pumps will work. I think the key thing is the work that Efficiency Maine has done. We are on their vendor locator, and Dana, thank you for picking the slide that showed us number 1 on top of the list. We are always in the top 3 because that's all we do is heat pumps. So we do a lot of rebates. I was speaking to Andy, who was on this call but had to jump off. There is a heat pump rebate processed by Efficiency Maine once every 5 minutes. So they're doing about 25,000 rebates per year. And of the I think there are a little over 700 vendors on the list. I think 50% of that work is being done by the top 20. So as Dana said, there are a lot of people on this call that are policymakers and people who are trying to recreate what we have in Maine. Don't get hung up on having 700 vendors on your list. Find 20, maybe find 30. They're going to do all the work. Samuel Warren, who is on this call, asked a question about workforce. That's one of the biggest barriers that we have. I could hire 3 electricians today, and that would allow us to increase our output by at least 20%. So if you know electricians, if you know young people who are looking to figure out what they want to do in life, I would say have them go be an electrician. You know, that's what we all need. You know, we need electricians to wire heat pumps, air source, heat pump water heaters, electric vehicles, solar. You know, that's really what we all need across the country is electricians and people to install all of these systems. So, you know, Samuel, thanks for that question, because that really is the thing that we all need. You know, that number that Efficiency Maine is doing now is only being limited by the number of electricians in the state or in the country, really. So, you know, as you're vetting vendors, you know, just make sure that they have the proper staff and the proper training. You know, with the vendor locator, you know, if I were not on that list, you know, we really wouldn't be in business, because Efficiency Maine is really raising the awareness of heat pumps across the state and obviously beyond with calls like this. So, you know, we participate with them. We provide input, and that's the key. That's another key note, is that they're always looking for input from the people who are participating in the programs. You know, so they send out questionnaires and we immediately answer so that we can give our feedback on how we would like to see things done, and they're always open to it. You know, it really makes me feel valued as a vendor and as a contractor to be asked, you know, what do I think? So, you know, we also like the fact that they offer financing. So they offer financing through NEIF. As a result, I don't participate in any other financing programs. You know, we just send them to Efficiency Maine. And along the same lines as Dana was talking about with the rebate processing, we engage with a customer. They want financing. We send them to Efficiency Maine. They fill out their paperwork to, you know, to get approved for financing. Efficiency Maine sends us a form saying this customer has been approved. We go do the work. We submit a completion form. If we submit that completion form by 8:30 in the morning, that money is in my account by 2 o'clock that day. You know, and along the lines of cash flow, like Dana was saying, it's so huge for the cash flow of a small business. And that's, you know, all 700 vendors on that list are small businesses. So
thank you so much for jumping in and starting to answer the questions. Really wanted to give Dan an opportunity to answer the question about financing as well. But before I do that, I just wanted to say thank you very, very much for those presentations. Yeah, this has been tremendous learning opportunity. Dan, did you want to respond to the financing question as well?
I think I might respond to 2 other questions. One was if schools are included in the emissions reduction goals, and I would say yes. That's, you know, the slide I showed are really kind of transportation, buildings, industrial and electric power. So yes. The workforce piece, I think Scott really hit it well, as he's the one that is actually trying to hire folks in the field. But we've launched something called the Clean Energy Partnership out of our office to convene industry and education and others, and have some limited grant funding that we've been able to put forward to that, but are really starting with defining the issues, trying to bring people together and figure out how to get more people into the field. And yeah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. I'll go ahead and just stop the presentation so that we can see each other. We only have really time for a very few questions in addition to the ones that have been answered already. Thank you to the presenters who have been attempting to answer those in the chat. We will be following up with some written answers hopefully as well, because we just simply don't have the time to answer all of the great questions that came through. Trying to see, Lawrence, was there one that jumped out to you as the most in our limited time, the one that we haven't answered yet?
Yeah, good question. So we talked about workforce, transitioning workers. I think and Scott was highlighting the importance of that. Let's see. Is there, somebody go ahead.
Yeah, sure. On the kind of program financing side, I mean, we could spend a long time talking about this, but I think what I've seen, and Dana and Scott both talked about, is really the simplicity of the program being very, clear. I think we're really excited about the upcoming state incentives coming from the federal government and how to kind of leverage or braid or whatever term you want to use, and really have, they come with that income focused requirement. And I think the program needs to be different based on kind of the population that's being served and what that looks like. And so it takes a bunch of industry, government, others working together to try to figure out how to set those programs up, what they look like, what's going to come after. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about that.
Great, that's very helpful. And I'm sure there's lots of enthusiasm as well as questions around all of that. Dana, you came off mute. Did you want to say something briefly?
Yeah, I just wanted to, one of the questions was just kind of like about why programs across the country don't have this level of simplicity. And I got to say that it's a difficult thing to do. And that gets back to the very beginning that I spoke about having a quasi-state agency be sort of like in charge of their own world. I've seen a lot of programs like the Public Utility Commission will bake in all kinds of complexity to their technical resource manual calculations. And then that rolls down to the utilities. And then the utilities bake in a whole bunch of complexity that they put upon the delivery team. And then by the time it gets to the delivery team to design the program, they're so calcified in what flexibility that they have and the metrics that they have to meet, that it makes them difficult for them to make a program that has a flexibility that works with the marketplace. So it really requires each stage of that chain to provide the chain below it with the maximum amount of flexibility and only focus on the limited objectives that they have. Simplicity it's not simply saying, well, we're just going to run a program. I mean, like Efficiency Maine inspects projects, they verify that it's working, they're constantly making improvements to it. It's just that like the focus is about making something that is going to work with the marketplace and the psychology of all the participants in the chain.
What a great note to end on. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate all of your time and insight and expertise. And thank you so much. Again, we'll go ahead and stop recording. You'll be able to find that later today. We'll share it with everybody in case you want to revisit it at a later date. Thank you all, Dan, Dana, and Scott. Really appreciate it, and have yourselves a lovely day. Take care.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.